Hello, you're welcome to yet another episode of Talk Law Nigeria. So today we're going to be discussing on the validity of a contract. Now the story we have today is about a lady, Mrs. Faith. Mrs. Faith wanted to sell her wrappers for a fair price, so she told people around her about her intention to sell her wrapper. Now, Mrs. Rose, her church member, picked interest in that offer she had made and sent her child to speak with Mrs. Faith. After talking about the wrappers and everything, they did not, however, decide on the specific wrapper she wanted to buy. Neither did they decide on the price of the wrapper. The child left, and after some time, Mrs. Faith was in their need of money, and Mrs. Ugo came across and decided to purchase the said wrappers for a certain amount, which she did. Mrs. Rose, on the other hand, became angry. She was pissed at Mrs. Faith and asked her why she had sold the wrappers they've already agreed on to her. She decided to then institute an action against Mrs. Faith for breaching their agreement. Now, the issue in contention is, was there a contract between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Rose? And has Mrs. Faith actually breached the contract by selling off the said wrappers to Mrs. Ugo? Let's find out.
Between two persons that the law will enforce or recognize as affecting the rights and obligations of the parties. Certain elements of a contract, ranging from offer, acceptance, capacity to contract, and intention. Now, offer is a promise or an undertaking made by a person known as the offeror to another known as the offeree, with the intention that the terms of the contract will be binding on the both parties upon the acceptance of the offeree. Whilst acceptance is a definite and concrete acceptance of the terms of a contract made or to a person. Now, where an offer is made to the offeree, it is expected that the offer is accepted. Where this acceptance will be made known is by the words of the party, where the party says yes to every term that has been stated. It can be drawn into an agreement and signed by the both parties, and by the conduct too we can infer. From acceptance, as we know, we have several forms of it that are invalid. When a person makes an offer to another and there is no definite assent or consent to that offer made, then it cannot be said to be acceptance. Cross offer is one of these types of invalid acceptance. It occurs where two parties make offers to each other and yet there is no acceptance. There is no agreement to the terms of the offer made. In the instance, in the case stated, Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Rose only made simultaneous offers. They did not agree on a certain amount or a certain term. They only communicated their intentions to contract. Between Mrs. Rose and Mrs. Faith, they only communicated their intention to contract, and yet there was no acceptance communicated between the both parties. But the relationship between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Ugo is a valid sale because Mrs. Faith at the time owes no obligation to Mrs. Rose to not contract with another on the said property. And so the sale between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Ugo is a valid sale, and to that effect cannot be questioned by any action that Mrs. Rose takes, as the sale is a valid one. And since we have established the fact that the purported acceptance of Mrs. Rose is invalid, as it falls under the invalid kind of acceptance known as a cross offer, we then know that there is no contract that is established between the both parties, because the sale that is entered into between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Ugo is a valid sale.
Well, viewers, you've heard it all. What was contracted between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Ugo was actually a valid contract. Why? Because there were ingredients of both the offer, acceptance, consideration, and what have you. Whereas what happened between Mrs. Faith and Mrs.
Ugo.
No, what happened between Mrs. Faith and Mrs. Rose was
Just like
merely
crossover.
a crossover. That's just it. So Mrs.
Mrs. Ugo has a validity.
Mrs. Ugo. What's it? The second person.
Mrs. Rose was not valid.
Rose. So Mrs. Rose, you actually do not have any case in law against Mrs. Faith because your contract or agreement you entered into was not valid. Thank you very much. Keep watching Talk Law Naija. Please subscribe to our YouTube channel. Thank you and see you next time. Bye.